when I was looking at the list, I found that so far we have fewer art critics looking at art. There are others who have been looking at art, poets and filmmakers and such like. But then this is what it's supposed to be, the various ways of looking at art. And one of the great advantages of this series has been that the audience is forced to look at a work of art for 45 minutes or so, which it would otherwise not do. You know, normally you go to an exhibition or to a show and you watch a thing for a minute or two and that's it. But here you have to watch almost compulsorily a work of art. So that is one great advantage in any case. And then you see it with the eyes of someone who has studied that work of art. We leave the choice, of course, to the speaker to choose the work he or she happens to like to talk on. We are very happy. We have had in this series people like filmmaker Kumar Shahani, writers and art lovers like Dilip Chitre and Prayag Shukla. We have had Ranjit Hoskote, we had Geeti Sen, who else? Rajiv Lochan, and now we have Yashodhara Dalmia. Now Yashodhara Dalmia is a well-known art critic and art historian. She has written, not so recently I think, now it is about 2 years, that you did your Amrita Shergill biography, which is perhaps the best biography of the celebrated modern of India. And she has done a much talked about book, Contemporary Art of India and Pakistan, and The Making of the Modern Indian Art of the Progressive, published in 2001, which is supposed to be one of the most authentic and authoritative history of that period. Well, she has done a show of drawings by Francis Newton Souza called Souza in London with the British Council in 2004, and she is working on a comprehensive book on modern and contemporary Indian art. Forever she seems to be working on something very comprehensive, so whatever it means. So there you are. Normally we expect the speaker to speak for about 40 to 45 minutes. It could be more, depending on him or her, and depending on, of course, your continued interest in the matter. But after that, we have a brief session in which question answers could take place. More questions, less answers, more brief comments than long statements, but we'll come to that later. So Yashodhara Dalmia, and it is interesting that just now, when, for reasons you all know, Christian community is under great pressure, we should meet this evening to look and acknowledge the fact that one of the masters of contemporary Indian art was a Christian, and what he made of it, what kind of an art he created out of his Christianity is another matter. Perhaps she will be discussing that at some length, but it is very interesting, coincidental to talk on Francis Newton Souza. Souza was a difficult person. Many of us have known him personally, and many of us have passed through many difficulties, but there is no doubt about the fact that he was one of the masters of the contemporary Indian art. So here you have Yashodhara Dalmia talking on Death of the Pope by Francis Newton Souza. May I say that we are professionally filming these, and we hope later to bring out, what are they called, DVDs, and not only bring them out, but to show them in cinema houses, in PVRs or whatever they're called. I have never been to one so far, but I think this is the name. And also bring out a book, which will be a unique book because it will contain essays by several important lookers at art on specific works of art. Perhaps the only one we will have in India at least in vis-a-vis the modern Indian art. So, Yashodhara Dalmia and Souza.
Not the least being Sachin Tendulkar and wonderful goings on at Mohali. So, I'm glad you turned up. I'm going to speak about a chilling painting. Let me have the slide. It's a chilling painting in this festive season, but as we shall see, in the end, it's quite heartwarming. This is a masterpiece made by Francis Newton Souza in 1962, Death of the Pope. He's made it deftly with short, furious strokes, the dead Pope, and around him the grieving clergy. He's modulated this from the bed of pain. The grey blue alternating with shafts of white create an irradiation, counterpoised by the somber black at the center. It's also, it also creates a rippling effect. There's a rippling effect of the composition, which, could suggest calming waters and a body sinking slowly below. He actually was, a wonderful draftsman, and his, this is very evident in the work. He has indeed, this work is an ensemble of lines rather than color, which have injected it with force. The dead Pope lies inert, far from the grandiose figure, a hollow frame with sinister fangs for hands. The surrounding priests, while in suppliant postures, convey an inner malevolence and greed. Interestingly, they are dressed in black suits and ties, and could be interchangeable with the well-heeled and the rich, with their power, corruption, and greed. The close nexus between the two becomes emphatic when accorded a divine sanction. The diabolical heads created by Souza since the mid-50s reaches its apogee in this work, a masterly narrative of decadence. Ashokji mentioned that the Christian community and so much of it is being talked about these days. Souza too attacked the clergy, but with very different ends, as we shall see. Born in Portuguese Goa in 1924, Souza had a strict Roman Catholic upbringing. As a young boy, he would pray devoutly for hours, or rather he was made to, awestruck by the splendor of the church and terrified by the iconic and petrified figure of Christ staring down at him. He stated, "The Roman Catholic Church had a tremendous influence over me, not its dogmas, but its grand architecture and the splendor of its services. The priests dressed in richly embroidered vestments, these wooden saints painted with gold and bright colors, staring vacantly out of their niches, the smell of incense, and the enormous crucifix with the impaled image of a man, supposed to be the Son of God, scourged and dripping with matted hair, tangled in plaited thorns." It was these images which were to haunt him and inform his work for the rest of his life. Souza's rebellious nature got him expelled from Xavier's in Bombay when he was found making pornographic drawings in the bathroom. The Jesuits found them anathema to the blonde operatic Christ and flaxen-haired shy virgins which he was supposed to imitate. Soon after, he was placed in the JJ School of Art, then a pivot for art students. He did not last long there too and was expelled for joining a demonstration against the British. But this only impelled him to come home and paint furiously with a palette knife on his mother's cutting board. The Blue Lady, as he titled this work, was a large, outrageously frontal nude, and it was exhibited in his first exhibition in 1945. It set the tone for the rest of his work. In an act of rebellion as well as foresight, he founded the Progressive Artist Group in 1947, which critiqued both the regressive modes of the Bengal school and the academic styles of the British art colleges. Am I being heard?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the catalogue of the first exhibition held by them, he stated, "Today we paint with absolute freedom for content and technique, almost anarchic, save that we are governed by one or two sound and elemental eternal laws of aesthetic order, plastic coordination, and color composition." He added, "Our art has evolved over the years of its own volition, out of our own balls and brains." But to override the restrictive circumstances at home, not the least because at the 1949 exhibition at the Bombay Art Society, 2 of his works were removed and the police raided his flat to see obscene paintings, he decided to leave for London the same year. He was to spend the next several years in London, where his work was to reach its peak, and he catapulted into fame. It has to be said that while his themes were predominantly Christian, it was not a compassionate God that Souza painted. His thick demonic strokes etched out a merciless and vindictive God, and his cardinal saints and priests were both cunning and corrupt. As a child, he had grown up worshipping a wrathful and awe-inspiring God, transported to the colonies in its particularly agonizing aspect. He also assimilated on a visit to the Catalonian Museum in Barcelona while in Europe the hieratic figures of Romanesque art with their hypnotic transfixed gaze delineated in bold lines and dressed in elaborately ornamental and colorful garments. Souza, in imbibing these, turned them inside out, making the transfixed frontal images sinister and petrified, to reveal the hypocrisy of the church as well as the elite. In the painting Mr. Sebastian made in 1955, which is around the time when he starts making these very demonic heads, we have the saint in a dark suit and menacing countenance. The arrows which pierced his body are jabbed into his face and leg vehemently, as if in vengeance for his evil deeds. The Crucifixion, 1959, has Christ more as an effigy made of thorny sticks and a gruesome face with whiskers and teeth. In the Cardinal, made in 1960, the aggressive lines, bare teeth, and the sinister expression are very far from the pious figure one is led to expect. He had visited Rome on an Italian government scholarship the same year, 1960, and this and other images like Death of the Pope were to follow. It is evident that Souza wanted to lay bare the hypocrisy of religious authority. As he said, Renaissance painters painted men and women, making them look like angels. I paint for angels to show them what men and women really looked like. The occasional prophet Souza made, however, like the priest in 1955, has a bearded man dressed in ornamental vestments, ruminating within himself. The eyes placed on the forehead now gaze philosophically into the distance. While the flaying of religious figures and dramatic unveiling of their Machiavellian tactics make a powerful impact, his secret fascination for them makes his paintings unique. What he stated, "My beginnings were small and secret, and growth was by contact with Christ." This also shows in his studies of women, voluptuous, shocking, nude, but not without a sense of awe which always bordered on tenderness. The Black Nude, made in 1961, harking back to the Black Mary of his childhood in Goa, is a demoness with sharp fangs for teeth and fingers, but also iconic in a looming form, arousing reverence. Visual one, please. Humanized religious figures, despite their power, the work would not have had a far-reaching effect. But it overlaid his priests with a sense of corruption and manipulation which existed among the upper classes, thereby introducing a wider social connotation. In a suite of drawings made in 1955, Six Gentlemen of Our Times, he constructs these grotesque faces with soulless eyes placed on the forehead, gnashing mouth fully bared, the face a ridged rocky terrain, bounded by lines and petrified by its own violence. One marvels at the simplicity of means by which this extraordinarily mobile visage is constructed, with dexterous cross-hatched strokes used like harpooning spears. The bristling effect he created with this formed the main characteristics of the figure, which was violent and mobile. He deployed these faces to expose the decadence of the upper class, which was outwardly civilized. But it is to his credit that he did not spare himself either. A self-portrait from this period has the artist's image pierced with hatchings and with glittering, malevolent teeth. He described himself, eyes in the brow, the better to see with the brain. Stars in the face are the scars of smallpox. Arrows in the neck like flies mean affliction. The grinding of teeth is not in the day of resurrection, but today. The jacket, the tie, and stiff collar are signs of respectability. Interestingly, he could easily be interchangeable with any of these. Of course, in real life, he didn't look like this. But then it's not a surprise that, this short poem he wrote about himself sounds a little bit like The Big Bad Wolf and the Little Red Riding Hood, because he had a wild imagination. These ravished faces were Souza's arsenal with which to combat the debris of existence, and in constructing them, he stated with a great deal of bravado, as you know, Picasso drew the human face. They were magnificent, but I have drawn the physiognomy way beyond Picasso in completely new terms. These fellows gave up after Picasso and became abstract, or they painted garbage cans, thereby avoiding the whole problem of finding a new draftsmanship. He stumped them and the whole of Western art into shambles. When you examine the human face, I am the only artist who has taken it a step further. Now, this was a gross exaggeration. What could be said was that his heads remained his most powerful invention, and their raw immediacy confronted with great force the corruption he witnessed around himself. Back to the Pope. Crescendo. In a way, it's a celebration, in one sense, of these heads. It was an elegy to the dead in the living. Souza was to extend his vocabulary to dots, circles, and loops to create faces which represented the mindless violence of countries upon one another. Thus he made the mad prophet in New York, or the manufacturer of nuclear weapons. This is all around the 60s, early 60s, describing the larger machinations of destruction. He stated gleefully, I have not only dehumanized a man into two lines, cross-hatched on either side, but I have also reduced the cosmos to a dot. Around 1960, Souza's landscapes too, which had up to this time been simple rectilinear structures, they started exploding with a cataclysmic force which wreaks havoc. The tottering houses in their frenzied movement indicate all things falling apart, of the very root of things being shaken, of a world of the Holocaust and thalidomide babies. Now it's true that Picasso's shadow loomed large over Souza, as it did over most artists. In the very distortion and fragmentation of the face, he was considerably influenced by Picasso. And at one time, he in fact made a drawing in 1962 called After Demoiselle d'Avignon, that path-breaking painting which shattered most artists. But he allowed himself to be influenced and scoffed at notions of purity in art. According to him, it's all very well to talk in metaphors about having roots in one's own country, but roots need water from clouds, forming over distant seas, and from rivers having sources in different lands. When Souza arrived in London in 1949, he experienced his post-war ads where ravaged buildings and food shortages cast their gloomy shadows. Reflecting the dark mood of the post-war era, artists like Francis Bacon created human figures which express the hideous, the brutal, and the violent in man. In fact, a large retrospective of Bacon had taken place at the Tate in 1962, and it displayed all these ambushed figures, with their seething, gnashing, gyrating movement. And, it's unlikely that Souza ever met him, but in 1954, when he participated in the group show held at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, along with artists like Graham Sutherland, there was Francis Bacon, with whom he had a particular affinity. The encounter with the poet, critic, and editor of Encounter, Stephen Spender, which had brought this about, was to lead to the publication of his autobiographical essay, Nirvana of a Maggot, the following year, and won him further acclaim. That there is a thematic similarity between the two artists is a fact which has not been given sufficient attention. Can we have visual too? Mouth and the teeth. And then much later, this work, which is Pope Innocent X, 1953, a painting after Velázquez. Notice the gilded chair and the pomp and the splendor and the horrific expression on the Pope. Bacon was an atheist, but consistently painted biblical themes for the purpose of articulating the savage depths of existence. In his heads of the late 40s, we see faces distorted beyond recognition, eyes transfixed in horror, mouth open in a silent scream. These heads have been made in 48, 49, and the Pope work is in 1953. This searing indictment of pain inflicted on man was to find its full articulation in his study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X, made in 1953, where the religious head sitting on the gilded chair has his mouth open with fully bared teeth, both grotesque and anguished. It is as much a grand spectacle as it is gruesome and horrifying, and both aspects seem to have fascinated Bacon. By reveling in the dark, brutal nature of man, Bacon's figures redeemed themselves from the depths of darkness. In league with artists like Bacon and Sutherland, and both were preoccupied with the religious themes of Christ and crucifixion with very different ends. One, that is Bacon, sought to reveal evil, while the other aimed at reviving religious fervor. Souza could be said to be part of the Grotesque school in London, which expressed the horror of man's inhumanity to man. Back to the In the eroticized violence of his poems, Saints and Christ, he brought the lurking evil up front so that it could be confronted. When you choose evil, you can't throw bones of contention away. You will have to chew them yourself and like them. And if God sends his son again, you will have to break him in every bone so that he will not rise again. He also says, I can't differentiate good from evil, purity from perversity. And if I could, I'd always choose evil and perversity, hell and brimstone, fornication and corruption. By apprenticing himself to the devil, he aimed at exposing the very innards of evil. He was a double agent, actually. He secretly had been good.
Yeah.
It is not surprising that he reveled in his deep, dark secrets over several brutal works. The brooding intensity of these is matched by occasional despair, even tenderness, as in the Deposition or the Lament of the Dead. Visual themes. Existence begin to sag in later years. But even when they lack force, they don't lack conviction. In his Last Supper, he once again creates an array of wounds around Christ, who also doesn't seem to look too respectable. By this time, Souza's gownish heads have become wedges, cylindrical and tubular shapes, sometimes without features, but nonetheless sinister. Interestingly, he places a somnolent philosophical figure in their midst, bringing the demon and prophet within the same frame. Earlier he used to make these figures separately and only occasionally, but interestingly now it's within the same frame. In this rogues gallery, the figures are all of varied colors, expressions, and backgrounds, matching a multipolar world. It's made in much later, in 89. Back to the In the end, open and optimistic. By bringing evil right at one's doorsteps, there is an underlying belief that it can be understood and ultimately mastered. The visual intensity of the work provides a jolt, like an electric shock, which brings about a sensual awareness of life and its significance. And in doing so lies the grandeur, which is subterfuged but always present with Souza. Thank you.
Just heard Shradha Dalmia talking about this painting and also taking you a short journey through Souza's preoccupation with evil, sinister faces, etc. and confronting evil. If there are any short comments or questions, you're welcome. The first one is the difficult one. Someone has to make the first shot, and then others follow.
Okay, yeah. He may have fallen out with his other friends, but he didn't fall out with me in his latter years. I think, many years ago after he'd done, there was when he was lambasting Christ and all this K, and they didn't know who KK was. It was either me or Karl Kandalawa, and they argued about this sort of thing. Now, what I had said in this article was that Souza is really interested more in himself than in Christ. And if he is taking the subject of Christ, or his, shall we say, being a disciple of the devil, it's because he is able to formulate more interestingly than he would if he was painting angels. Very difficult to paint goodness, you know. So he launched on this sort of evil tack as a matter of strategy. Because he comes back and you see the later paintings, which are really not as convincing as the Death of the Pope, which is probably the best painting I think that he ever did. We went out. I met him in London shortly afterwards, and we went to a pub and we were having a drink. And he said, "Was it you who wrote that article?" I said, "Yes, it was." And I said, "And do you agree with it?" He said, "Yes, I do." So, but he wasn't. You see, one thing about Souza was he was a terribly honest fellow. He didn't care. I mean, he didn't really have any pretenses or didn't want to keep face on things or anything like that. He said what he felt, and he was using painting that was a tack for many, many, many things for him. Well, I don't know about the conversation. I've just said that there was a duality in him. I think it was hinted that beneath this kind of love of the grotesque was something very tender in the man too, and I think that is very true. Thank you.
Sense of not compassion, but there was an underlying tenderness or kindness with all his works, and that's what made it special. That's what made it special. This was, I think it came out especially in his works on women, you know. They were, you know, I know they looked very brutal and savage and, you know, almost bordering on the pornographic. But you could, if you looked at it closely, he was always in awe of them. You know, they were always made larger and they looked iconic. And there was an underlying tenderness in the way he did women. Well, you know, there's a difference in someone who knows him very well, inside out, and someone who's seeing his work from the outside. You probably know a lot more about Souza than you care to reveal.
No, I think actually when it comes to scholarship, it's probably better that you didn't know the man. I think it's because I knew him personally, so there are many, you know, many sides. It's a many-sided affair, and this is what happens with artists when they get to know each other, you know. And what really appears in their work, unless it's deciphered very, very accurately and over a long period of time, again, you will never get to know the real truth of the man. You know. And it's actually, when you look at painting, it's not really, you're not really interested. I mean, I'm not. I don't think many people are. That looking at the death of the Pope, and the Pope is dead, and people standing around him and so forth. One is looking at the propulsion with which this kind of subject matter propelled him into creating the particular kind of forms that he did. There are many sort of, he was akin to many other painters, not necessarily Picasso. Picasso was only but one, but there were many others. I mean, Rouault had a great effect on him at one stage. But there, yeah, I mean, he was a complex man, and that's what, as I think John Berger once said about him, you know, that he writes many traditions, but he serves none. But and he always, Souza was very fond of quoting and little snippets out of context, of course. He never followed up with what else the Berger said. And what Berger said was that it's like watching the grand opera with the sound cut off.
To you, talking about him, his life in a brief sketch of his life, I wish you talk a little bit about the painting, this particular painting itself. I think you were very general, if I may say so, in your comments on the painting, but I think it would be interesting if you were to elaborate a little bit more on the painting itself. What, you generally said what he's trying to convey, but if you were to take each of the figures, for example, one by one, or why some are in ties and others are not, or I think it will be interesting for some of us if you were to go a little bit more with why he chosen this particular painting. Christian just now said it's probably his best work. But if you were good enough to tell us a little bit more about this painting, why did you choose this particular painting? And what is, yeah, please.
As I said, you know, this was one of his, you know, it was a masterpiece made by Souza. And it came at a particular juncture when he had already made a considerable number of works, particularly of the human visage, you know. And the most important of these drawings was the one that I showed, Six Gentlemen of Our Times. So, I must add another thing. I was asked the other day by a German scholar, when he looked at, you know, this visual, that which pope was this? Now that's a good question. It was definitely Pope John the 23rd, who had died around then. And you must remember that Souza had been to Rome in 1960, and he had made a whole series of works titled Paintings in Rome, which had been shown at Gallery 1 later on. Gallery 1 was a very important gallery in London at that time. But, so it was probably Pope John the 23rd, and his death acted as a catalyst. In fact, interestingly, the post-war Italian sculptor Giacomo Manzu had also made a work called Death of the Pope in 1964, 2 years after Souza, in Rome. It was the door of St. Peter's. And this work was totally different. It showed a very compassionate Pope and, you know, a really grieving clergy. And it managed to convey what Krishna was talking about, that compassion and tenderness, which actually religious heads are supposed to convey. Now, I would not critique that at all. I would say that was an essential aspect of religion, Christian religion, the clergy. The thing with Souza was, it was not so much, actually he was not religious, you know. So this was a means to convey something. And because it had divine sanction, it would be even more forceful. If there's any particular thing that you would like to know about this work, I could elaborate more on it.
Excuse me, I just want to say something. I feel, according to what I see, recently read in the Spiegel, a German magazine, that even his personal physician sold or gave photos of his last moments to the press. He was surrounded till the end by corruption. That
That's
is
very
what
interesting.
I think.
You may be right, because as I said, I don't think this was the least bit realistic or related to history. So it's not, you know, it's not important that there was actually a death for John the 23rd around that time. It is possible that it was Julius. However, again, I would say that that too would act as a catalyst for him to make a work like this. Because as you notice, the clergy is wearing, you know, black suits, and he wanted to make a statement about the rich and the corruption, you know, particularly, you know, in those trying times after the war and the corruption he saw around himself.
But even there, I would now say it probably is Pius XII, because he was of Italian nobility, whereas John the 23rd was of peasant stock. He was of poor origin and a humble man till the end, whereas the other one was an arrogant one.
That's very interesting.
Just,
Thank you. You notice his hands, the popes, they're like fans. Could they be called peasant-like? I wonder.
Any other comment?
We know more about Souza why he was so insecure, or that is what has come out, that he didn't believe in, why he was so rebellious. Something more about the
made
other.
two statements altogether. One, that he was so insecure,
Yeah.
and the other, he was so rebellious.
Yeah, in his paintings he looks very, rebelling against religion. So that is, it's really, confusing about the artist.
Well, he was, as a child, he was forced to go to church, he was made to pray for us, but not just that, in Goa, the Portuguese, the kind of God, the kind of Christ, the images of Christ he saw in front of him, he was very frightened of them. They looked very demonic and vengeful, and he had to pray to them, So he was already scared.
So he was insecure.
Yeah,
Sure.
but I mean, again, I would say this, perhaps in his early years he was painting actually from these sources, but later on, and especially in London, which was actually the time when he really blossomed, it became a much wider statement. It became a wider statement about corruption and the hypocrisy of the rich, the politicians, the well-heeled. They were all men.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. White wants to.
I also enjoyed your very perceptive discourse, but coming back to the painting itself, do you see any significance in the number of people around the dead Pope, and do you see any significance in the color yellow on the faces? Of course, apart from any other reasons. I mean, since it's a thematic painting, or is it just arbitrary?
So that's an interesting question. And what immediately strikes me is that if you would remember the Pope that Bacon has made,
Yeah.
the Pope made by Bacon also has the color yellow on the chair,
Yeah.
gilded chair,
Mhm.
And he saw this happening, Bacon. He saw the Pope being carried in this procession, in this gilded chair, and he was fascinated by the whole grandeur and the spectacle of it. Now, coming back to Souza, we know that he's fascinated by all the splendor and drama of the church. It also makes for drama in his paintings. He knows that. He's a clever strategist. So, it's possible that he tries to introduce some, this element of pomp and splendor, or let's say not splendor, but a slight reference to this kind of, richness, the embroidered clothes that they wore. He can't do it in their clothes because he's dressed them in black.
It's not gilded though, it's yellow.
I know it's not gilded, but it is possible that he did it for that reason.
Sorry, it's basically black and white with a shot of yellow in various places. That's all. It's basically a black and white proposition. And color doesn't actually, one of the main strength of this picture lies in the fact that it's formally very, very tough. And he has not.
Chilling work.
There's no sort of, nice succulent color which would then divert your attention away from the main thrust of the painting.
But yet again, he does put a little bit of color.
Yellow.
Was it entirely for painterly reasons?
Yellow and a little
One
bit of,
wonders.
but very, very slight. It's very, very, very small.
Sometimes
It's hard.
when you ask artists later, why did they put that black there? Like I remember asking tie up this. He put a streak of black in one of his works. He said, I just thought it would balance the black on the other side. But obviously there was more to it.
Where is the painting?
The Death of the Pope belongs to the estate of John B. Nicholson, who was a very big Parsi collector in Bombay. And since his death a couple of years ago, about 5-6 years ago, it just belongs to the estate, which is a great pity because it's not any longer accessible to people. And I might take the credit for showing it the last time when I did a major show to open the National Gallery of Modern Art in Bombay. That show was on the progressives, and this work was there.
And it's large, is it? Rather like the size of
It's
that
a
part
large
of the soul at Christie's in the summer.
Yeah, it's a large work. Where's the caption? I had given the caption with the size. It's a large work.
It didn't sell for too much, you know, originally.
Yes, it had a very interesting history of the original ownership. The person was bought something.
The person who bought it was B. Chaudhary.
Yes.
It was sold in 10,000 rupees.
That's right.
And that was a news in next day news in
That's right.
Times of India in '63.
You mean it was considered high?
I was there in this show.
Oh, I see. But Bob Chowdhury
And
owned it.
painting, it was painted on a black canvas.
You mean the underneath,
Yeah.
the underneath coating is black? That one can understand.
Did he ever have any moral police gunning for him?
Oh yes.
Oh, yeah. That's why he left. I mean, that's not the reason why he left, but that's what happened to him last in Bombay before he left for London. He was part of a show at the Bombay Art Society, one of the few places where you could exhibit. And he had, amongst other paintings, he had a large self-portrait, a nude of himself, you know. And he had bared himself fully. And the moral police came in later. Actually, even the audience was shocked. They thought it was, you know, shocking, obscene. Then the moral police came, they brought down the painting, and I think they raided his house and took away 2 others. They took away 2 other paintings from his house. So that was a time when Souza realized that how could he, with his kind of vocabulary, exist in Bombay?
That was only in Bombay, and if it, most likely it would have been the Shivsena, I suppose.
And he seems to be like an early anti-conversion would say that.
Sorry?
Luckily, Shivsena would not find anything objectionable in this.
Conversion would say that.
No, but that thing repeating
But you know,
itself.
just 1 minute. I want to tell you something. He never changed his religion.
No?
Never. Never. That's what I'm saying. There was a secret fascination for all this. And sometimes he brings it together, but it's always present in his work. That's why he was investigating evil. He wasn't evil.
Yeah, Ishwadra, I wanted to ask you, with all this history of all this having gone through, there was another exhibition later in life in 89-90 in Bombay called East-West Encounter, and which was banned up finally, and then he brought the paintings to Delhi and showed them here, and of course part of them were also bought by National Gallery of Modern Art. Why was the show banned? Because I firstly don't remember what was the explanation given. Do you have any knowledge of why was this East-West Counter show banned in Bombay in 89-90?
I remember it was held at the NCPA.
Yes.
But in fact, this I'm learning from you, that it was banned.
Yes, it was banned in Bombay. There were 8 paintings which he was showing, and then it was banned in Bombay, so he had taken off that show and brought them to Delhi.
I hope it wasn't because of Souza.
You know, I'd like, sorry to be butting in here, but since I was really witness to all of this, you know, yeah, when Souza was accosted with this painting, self-nude as it was, and they said, take it out, or do something, but we can't show it like this. So what he did was, he actually put a bit of paper across the offending parts, as it was. He did, and then that was it there. The next folio, the next chapter is when Akbar Padamsee is showing. And he was showing an infinitely more innocuous painting, which you wouldn't even know what it was, you know, and then you saw a man, and as the police called it, you know, the offensive part of this was that his right hand is on her left breast. You know, that was the thing. And Akbar had to fight this this case.
Yeah.
And it's become case history. It's there.
And he won in the end.
He won, yes, it was Justice Chagla who was really responsible for getting him through in that.
Ram Rahman wanted to say.
Yeah, I was just,
Take the mic, take
yeah, I was just actually going back to the painting and the figures in the back and this whole idea of that slightly bilious yellow. I think the one figure in this painting which is kind of the most tender, that you feel actually regrets this death which is before him, is that figure right in the back, the second from the right.
You're right.
And that's the one figure which is in white. And you see, with the faces,
More white than
the face, and it's almost like a skull. And those eyes are almost like, like something has been, some vicious object has been punched into the, it's very, very different from the way the eyes have been treated in the other faces. But with that hand and the posture, you really feel that figure is feeling, there's a real sorrow in that figure, and I'm fascinated by that figure. Just
You're absolutely right, Ram. I think there you have pointed something, I stand corrected when I said that in the Last Supper you see the two within the same frame. They're already there. And in fact, around this time he made the deposition, early 60s, and that painting is full of these forms, lamenting the death of, the brutal death of Christ. And it's in white, so why do you think it's in white? Do you think it's in white because it's pious? White being the color of purity.
I don't think he thought anything about that at all. He's just painting a picture.
yeah.
Anybody else? And let me finish with an evening that I spent with Souza in New York by sheer accident. I happened to be there in '85, and I had Souza's number. I rang him up, and he asked me to come. He used to live somewhere near Lincoln Center, not very far from there. And it was an old building. I think there was no lift or something. You had to climb these stairs. And the flat was stuffed with paintings, including the toilet. I mean, it was with some difficulty that you could use the toilet because of painting here and painting there, painting behind the WC and all that. It's an enormous amount of paintings. And his kitchen was not a working kitchen, so the kitchen was also stuffed with paintings. They were all very colorful paintings and this, that, and the other. Then he said, let's go out for dinner. So after drinks, we started moving. All of a sudden, he asked me, have you seen pornographic films? And I said, no. He said, you must see one. Let's go. I tried mildly to protest. I'm not really interested. Why should we be going there? We have a wonderful evening. We're talking. Why should we? He said, no. There was some cinema house there in which we landed. And as you know, most of these porn show has only 1 or 2 viewers. So we went, 2 of us. We sat together for 5 minutes. And then he said, no, we should sit separately. A pornographic film should be watched lonely. Okay, so it was very, very boring after 15 minutes. Then he realized that I must be getting bored, so he stood up. He said, let's go, that's all right. I just wanted you to have some experience of this. So we went out, and then, of course, there was a little shop or some kind of an eating place where we had our dinner. Later, when I came back and I wrote him a letter, by the time it picked up some kind of a quarrel with Swami. And he wrote absolutely outrageous letters to Swami as not having any of his works in Bharat Bhavan collection. And the reason he gave was that Swami was anti-Christian, which was absolutely astounding. Not only that, he wrote a letter to the chief minister, alleging the same thing. And of course, the letter from the chief minister came to me for a possible comment and a reply and all that. He kept on pursuing that, and then perhaps he then he sent me a White Revolution or something he called. Was it called White Revolution? Yes. There was Redmond. Redmond or whatever. There was he is carrying out a fight with Swami. And although Swami and I are colleagues, he sends me this White Revolution thing. It was some kind of poems and things of that kind. And he wrote to me saying that since you are a poet, I'd like you to let me know what do you think of these as poems. Now, they were not really poems, they were sort of statements, this, that, and the other. There's nothing very poetic about them. So I sort of made a vague reply, and that's the end of the matter. In any case, Souza was a very, very interesting, fascinating personality. I sometimes wonder why nobody has ever attempted a biography of Souza. And that's about it. There is Christian time to do that. To the more important part of the evening, the more spiritual part is to follow. Copal and Edelweiss, who are co-sponsors of this talk, are very grateful to you for being with us this evening. We'll soon let you know who's going to be the next speaker and which is going to be the next work of art we are going to look at. Thank you very much for coming, and do join us for this spiritual evening.
Thank you. Thank you.